What's going on, guys? This is part one to my coverage of the 2021 Winter Forge training event hosted by S&S Training Solutions with the assistance of the Light Fighter Studies Group. And of course, I got my good buddy Bruce accompanying me this time. If you have seen any of my One Shepherd videos, you may recognize this location as the Combat Maneuver Training Center, which is the same place that Alpha Company One Shepherd hosts its training at. Morning and day one started bright and early. As you can see, a good amount of snow was on the ground.
What do you think of that Unimog?
I'm all about it. You know I'm all about it. That is really awesome.
First thing on the schedule is some morning chow, followed by some much needed coffee. Following breakfast was a quick formation introducing the students to the course.
Thanks, guys. All right, so thanks for coming out to 2021 Winter Forge. We're really excited to have you guys out here. We're really excited to have snow on the ground down here for this event. We were a little afraid it wasn't going to be super cold and wintry down here, moving a little bit further south from up north, our location that kicked our ass last year. So the biggest thing I want to start off with is safety. We're not out here to prove anything to anyone and push yourself to the point where you get frostbite, hypothermia, anything like that. So if at any point, any time, you're feeling your fingers go numb, painful, anything like that, you don't feel right, make sure you speak up, say something, get warm, because we don't want to.
Next, we would begin a series of classes that were oriented towards cold weather operations.
And what that means is we're going to be experiencing mostly wet cold. Okay? So when we talk about cold weather environments, it's important to understand the difference between dry and wet cold, mostly because we as humans are a system, right? And if you can think about anything in the world, most of physics, objects are trying to maintain a state of equilibrium. Okay? We are a system of air, we're a system of liquid, we have all sorts of different types of subsystems inside of us, but the main thing that we're trying to do is regulate our temperature. And on normal, nice days, we don't think about it much because it's easy. You know, we have a t-shirt, shorts. If it's in the summertime, put a little bit of cold weather stuff on to go to the car, to get out of the car, to go to the grocery store, and that's about all we have to consider. But when we're conducting actual tactical operations, now we have to start thinking about climatizations constantly. And I'm not going to go too far into clothing systems yet, but it's important to understand that our body is constantly trying to maintain a state of equilibrium, and that we're trying to maintain that 98-degree core body temperature, right? So all the things that our body does to try to adjust to that, those are all signs and symptoms that help us as leaders and warriors adjust our equipment, but also our TTPs to it. Okay, so it's a lot of the time I think guys are super focused on gear. Gear's important in the cold weather, don't get me wrong. But what's more important is understanding how this stuff works in relation to what it is that we're trying to do as human beings. Okay, so if that makes sense, the next thing I'm going to talk about is a little bit of the difference between what the dry cold conditions do to us versus what the wet cold conditions do to us, and then what we have to do to actually adjust to the mission.
Inadequate training. That's why we're here today. That's why we brought it in the Light Fighter Study Group, because we saw all the skills that they were pushing out to their guys at last Winter Forge, and we said we need to have a concentrated day of skill set focused on bringing people up to speed on that, instead of just diving into an FTX where they're just going to fail. You know, there's always lessons to be learned in failure, but we wanted to learn all that stuff up front so we have more success than failure in the field. Poor clothing and equipment. Stephen Hines will talk about equipment and when to wear it and all that kind of stuff. We say buy the military EQUIC system because it's uniform, it's out there, it's cheap, but it's not always necessarily the best piece of gear for the environment you're going into. We just use that as a starting block. So if you guys come out again, Winter Forge or any environment that you go to, buy the piece of gear that's going to work better for you. If it's not exactly the same camo pattern that we want, I'm not going to fault you for it as long as it keeps you more effective, okay?
So it's all about maintaining not too cold and not too hot, right? And we have to balance that with our activity level. Remember our wet cold and our dry cold. And then we also have to balance that with whatever the task is, because like Rick mentioned, we might be pushing hard to make an ambush site before the other guys get there, and then immediately sitting down and not moving a muscle, and you can't move. So we have to strategically plan our kit for all these different confusing things. So we have wet, cold, dry, cold, active versus static. What's our body producing when we are active? There's two things I'm looking for.
Heat.
Okay, and what's the other thing?
Moisture.
Exactly. And what did Tyler say was one of the most critical points to staying warm in wet cold?
Stay dry.
Stay dry. So we are our own worst enemies when we are active. But we're also making that heat, right? So what we're looking for is equipment that will self-dry because we're going to get wet. We need to manage how much wet we get and not have too much on when we are active so that moisture can get out. And I'm not going to go into the science of that because this isn't like a 4-hour nerd class. But basically we need to change the dew point in our shells. So we kind of have 3 categories of layers. I'm going to hit the original Equex stuff because it's a little bit more simple. So we have insulation layers. Is there anything waterproof? This is just a polypro undergarment. Is there anything waterproof with this? So this is going to release a lot of moisture. It's going to allow moisture to pass from your body to the outside. It'll also allow moisture to come in. So that's good because this is our insulation layer. It needs to be kind of puffy. It's not our like super cold weather layer because this goes on under our kit, right? So it's kind of a pain to take on and off. So, but its primary job is to pass that moisture on to the next layer, okay? And then we have, I'm sorry, that's our base layer. I called it the wrong thing. So we also have insulation layers. So this is an M65 field jacket. This can be worn as an outer layer, but we also have this puffy on the inside that's our insulation. So this is kind of your mid-weight or your middle of the road insulation. Is this going to protect you from wind if it's not treated? No. It just keeps you warm. This is air pockets. Okay. Then you have your shell garments. And you'll notice that there's no insulation in this. This is just wind and water resistance. Any ideas why we might want to have these all separated into layers?
You can take them off and on and regulate your body temp.
Exactly.
At some point, we're going to have to take a break and get some type of shelter, right? And in normal temperate climates that are the rest of the 3 seasons, we do patrol bases. That's our tactical harbor, okay? In the wintertime, we do bivouac sites, okay? Bivouac sites are going to range anywhere from improvised shelters to full-blown prepared tentage. And we've got a little bit of everything to show you guys once we get to our tactical bivouac site for this class. The beginning portion here, though, is how to make site selection. Where are we going to put it, and what are the considerations that we need to think about in order to actually establish the bivouac site tactically, right? One of the first things that we're looking at is general considerations for suitability and security, just like a normal patrol base. So what are some of those considerations?
Upon completion of all of our classes, we then begin to pack our gear. We'd be heading into the field to begin practical application and establishing a bivouac site in a cold weather environment. There are important lessons that you need to follow when operating in the cold. One of the most important is how to dress. Part of that is knowing that when you are moving, you want to step off light. You should be slightly cold when you step off. The reason for this is simple. The second you start moving, your body's going to start heating up, and you will begin sweating. Too many warming layers will cause excessive sweat, which will in turn cause you to become very wet. Being wet in a cold weather environment can be very detrimental, so the objective is to mitigate that as much as possible. Once you reach the point where you're going to be stationary for an extended period of time, that is when you want to begin to plus up to the warming layers. Here you see we've reached our destination, and the guys are starting to pull additional warming layers out of their packs to put on.
We're waiting on the truck to get here, but while we're going to wait on that truck, what's happening next is we're going to start breaking into tent teams, okay? For this class, you guys are all basically one big tent team. We're going to show you how to set up the 10-man Arctic tent first, and then we're going to show you how to set up the Von Ruck system, okay? However, before we do any of that, we need to finish the site selection, okay? What that means is there's a few key locations we're going to have to determine. For this portion, you guys are going to walk and I'm going to talk. Okay, I'm going to physically show you where each of these sections are in this bivouac site. It is important to maintain track discipline. We talked about that earlier. Stay in single file and follow the tracks that are developed. Reason being is, while we're still back in this woods, you can tell not a lot of snow on the ground, so precipitation's not falling, but there are some open areas where there's still snow. UAVs can see tracks in snow. We just talked about that. So what we don't want to do is go too far off of our track discipline and give our patrol base away, okay? So we're gonna sight in both of the tent locations. We're gonna sight in the security, show you guys where we would set that up, sight in the latrine, and we're also gonna sight in the field kitchen, okay? And then the garbage pit, the water pit, etc. Make sense? Okay, so all you'll need for this one, make sure you bring your weapons with you. We'll go single file. We'll go up to the apex of the bivouac site. We're gonna do a triangular bivouac site for this one, just like a triangular patrol base, okay? So we'll go up to the apex. We'll show you where the tin man's gonna be. Then we'll come back down and we'll show you where the Von Wreck and the rest of the bivouac key locations are, okay?
After we occupied the area that was selected for our bivouac site, we then began to walk the area that was selected for our setting up our 10-man Arctic tent. After that, we turned to lunch. For this, we were issued a Mountain House meal that would need to be heated up in our individual field stoves.
He always has me humping his gear. He's got that big old rucksack, but I carry all his stuff.
Oh, she's going. And she's getting hot.
Doing the fourth and it's all what's the wrench on it?
And of course, Bruce being the good friend that he is, he took the initiative in heating up this old First Sergeant a nice cup of joe.
Cheers. What you got there? I got a Bruce latte.
After chow, we first began to learn about building a field expedient rifle rack to keep our weapons outside of the heated tent.
Erect a tarp, you just kind of flop a thing over it. Yeah, because everybody gets why do you keep your weapons outside?
Can you explain that real quick?
Well, a little bit of the normal keep them from being underfoot, but a lot of the cold weather, the condensation. You are not going to be able to aim at anything if you keep your rifle in the tent and go outside. Now,
icing issues.
And similar. The most obvious one is the condensation in the glass. But as I tell the child all the time, like, hey, the window's covered, the whole thing's covered. So the condensation that comes in your glass isn't due to a magic property of glass. It's just that you can see it. You're getting that same amount of ice on all the working parts of your gun inside it also. You can absolutely ice up a gun enough, you will go, bang! It just, well, okay, that's done until it warms up. So you leave it outside instead, acclimatized, whatever. Acclimated to the cold weather. And it will work fine. They are rated to work in ridiculously cold conditions. At least the gun. And if you have professional optics, they'll work fine
You
too.
leave your kit
Batteries,
outside for some reason. You don't get ice your mag wells, your magazines don't get froze up. All that stuff stays outside.
Night vision.
Yep.
that's arguable. Radios and night vision and stuff like that, because it's very hit and miss, especially because of things like battery life. Your power is going to be a problem, and the reduced battery power can be more of a problem than the possibility of condensation of electrical stuff. So you just kind of.
Is there any long-term concern with like that moisture on circuit boards and that kind of thing?
Yeah, ideally they're all waterproof and everything's fine. But things like the battery connection, if your battery bay removes, that's not completely waterproof. You're likely to get condensation.
Things like misting covers that go on your lenses to help with fogging. So that's something you should consider for cold weather and or going in and out of buildings a lot.
And you're kind of concerned with the condensation inside of the actual night vision unit itself. Causing damage.
Oh,
that's what I'm saying, like on the circuit.
That should be that's why we nitrogen purge things like that. So like ideally, all that stuff will continue operating. So ideally, and if you know the thing is working well, you usually bring the sensitive electronics inside, and you can put your helmet on, stuff like that. These less so. Also, modern the red dots even and stuff like that should keep working. Even with the power concerns, they use very little power. So half or a quarter of the power out of your power cell should keep your red dot running just fine, even in cold weather. It'll be fine. I think we're time to
Yeah, let's rack rifles
rack
and,
it all off.
and start working on the tent.
Yeah, usually stomp instead of shovel because you're going to want to go ahead and be on top of the snow, not get down to the mud.
Now we'd begin construction of the 10-man Arctic tent. This would definitely be a whole team effort to get this sucker up.
Can we use this tree? I'm hoping I can get a heat hurt so I can go back and stay in the warm tent. Where's that split piece?
So, guys inside,
Yo!
if you come to the front door, don't come through yet. You'll see a hole I'm putting a light through.
Yep.
There's one over here.
Okay.
There's 6 of them all around, I believe.
Yep.
6 or 8. We've got poles going to pass through to you and start putting them in.
Much the same way you did to the center pole.
Same way. Exactly
Stick it in the hole, then get it as upright as you can. If it's hard to get upright, just start shaking the tent and yell it at us, and we'll give you slack on the lines as you do it, okay?
So, come in the tent real quick, or we'll hold it open. So we got the center pole up in there. Center pole got up.
Plenty of room. Okay.
Plenty of room. The center pole went up in the middle of that ring. Once that was up and we got everything tensioned and was freestanding, we went around and in the corners we put these poles in. That pushed the sides out, and then we put the door poles in. And now we're gonna go through and make sure everything's tensioned and pulled out tight. Everything's staked down around the side of the tent. And that back door we're not gonna use. We're gonna make sure it's sealed up tight. Keep as much heat in as possible.
This heater is a multi-fuel heater. It's got your regulator here, which tells you which kind of fuel you can use. You can use JP4/gasoline, and then JP4/8, and on a setting that's below 25 degrees. We'll never use these. One, working with gasoline, it's very volatile, dangerous. Only in like an emergency situation would you want to use that. So we'll always use gasoline because it has a low flash point. So it's a lot. What did I say? Gasoline. Excuse me, you're right. Diesel we'll use because it has a low flash point. Thanks for catching that. It's a lot safer to work with in the tent and that kind of thing. It won't flash up in your face when you go to light it. It takes a little bit longer to go. So you adjust that regulator, you pull up right here and move it over. And ours should always be left on diesel right there. The way it works is the regulator sits about this high. It's gravity fed. The fuel will come in and come up to about right here on these two tubes. You pour diesel on this plate right here and let it sit for about 10 minutes, which we'll talk about the settings and the proper procedure. Throw in something to light that diesel fuel, and it'll burn on this plate. And while it's doing that, it's atomizing and heating up that diesel fuel in there to start sustaining combustion. Once that takes place, it just self-controlled, keeps burning as long as there's diesel fuel feeding it, okay? With anything where you're burning, getting things hot, fire safety, number one. We'll have a fire extinguisher out here when we are burning later. You always have to have a fire watch out here. Just make sure you're doing it safe, okay?
There it is. You got branches, bud.
I got it. You push it.
Not yet.
Might need to clip that one.
Big wad of paper, something like that, which you know, Joe Snuffy left behind this time. So we're gonna try to light it off with a Esbit fuel tab and see what happens. So hopefully it'll be successful.
Silence, please. Lit.
And I'm just gonna put it down on that plate right there. And we'll see. We might throw another tab on there too. Might throw one down below it.
Yeah, there's that big puddle down there.
Yeah.
Some crap down there too. Don't put your hand in there trying to light it.
it's supposed to be kind of like a cookie screen, but the beads.
Okay. Oh, it went out. Well, we'll shut it and see if it'll get hot enough with it shut.
Looks like it's starting to evaporate the diesel.
Yeah, right there next to it. So, we'll shut our light off. We'll come back and check it. About 10 minutes. Nothing happens. We'll let it cool down and try again.
They got fire in there.
Yeah, it's nice and clean now. See it burning? Come on in, boys. You come on over. That's it. Just keep an eye on it. Make sure you got a fire guard. We'll keep it going for the rest of the time we're up here, so you can come in here and get warm if you need to while we eat and whatnot.
So there's no setting change on it at this point.
We're at 3 now.
Yeah, so
We're at 3, and
yeah,
so
after
we're
you-
going to stay.
10 to prime, down to 3. Once it's prime, you
Yeah.
can light it. Then from here we can adjust it if we wanted more heat.
And when you do adjust it, it's not like an instantaneous adjustment. It's not like, you know, hitting your heater at home or in the car. It's gravity fed, so it takes a little bit for that fuel to build back up in there and get to that higher level. So if you set it up a little bit higher and it's still cold in here, don't get frustrated and crank it up even more. Just wait, you know, good 20-30 minutes for it to achieve that maximum temperature that you set it at. This is the Christmas tree, just a chopped down piece of cedar there. And what we want to do is have your heater going. We'll open up the draft there, and we'll get the hot air moving past your wet clothes so it can dry overnight. So hang your socks, t-shirts, whatever else is wet on there.
Mostly for the Arctic conditions, because when it gets that cold, fucking around outside is not good, right? We're trying to get indoors so we can get out of the elements. So just keep that in mind. Right now it's not a big deal because, hey, it's not that bad out. But as it gets colder and colder, every minute we stand out here not getting heat is minute we're burning calories, okay? So we have to do this in an orderly, controlled manner, and that's why most of this ends up being basically like a battle group, right? Okay, so once everybody is in there, they've got their sleeping systems laid, you're good to go. You know, there's competing theories between, you know, packing up, tearing down, packing up, tearing down. Henry just said, yeah, your courtesy is to kind of roll your side up if you need to leave type of thing. But your space is your space. You got your 9-man squad, theoretically. You've got 10 guys in here. You're good to go even with the heater. So you can leave your stuff where it's at, okay? The big thing is that only sleeping systems and the clothing that you're going to wear or potentially wear comes in with water, okay? When we need to do hygiene, we will come out, we will get our stuff, we'll come back in for the hygiene. When we're done with the hygiene, so shaving, brushing teeth, that type of thing, we bring that stuff back out and we repack it in the ruck. Things don't hang out in here. It's very important because you can notice there's no room. So the more crap you start bringing in and making a nest, that's going to get cluttered. 2 reasons why that's important. Safety, okay? In the event that there's a fire in this tent, and this is real world even for training, you have to be able to get the fuck out of this tent. These tents can burn within 2 to 3 minutes, okay? 2 to 3 minutes. It's a big deal. We'll talk in just a second about what the emergency exit drill is, but it looks a hell of a lot like react to contact, okay? With the react to contact, we're not like fighting each other to get over. It's the same thing in a fire drill at school, right? Like orderly exit, get the fuck out, make it quick, but don't fight, okay?
Got something to that?
Yeah.
Everyone should have a knife on them at all times in case it does get jumble fucked at the door or something, so you can cut your way out of the tent.
Yeah, so yeah, that's the old Alaska recommendation that they found is like, hey, like have a knife with you in case you have to cut your way out. One of the things that we do when it gets wet, cold like this is, especially if it's going to really drop below freezing and seal the edges of these tents, you'll notice there's these snow flaps, right? It's like, hey, what are those snow flaps for? That's for snow on the outside. Yes, it's great. It keeps the wind from coming out underneath. The problem is, if you don't put something between it, like pine tree burrows, those are the best things, and shove it, the tendency is the moisture on the ground will freeze, and now your tent's frozen to the ground, you can't get out. Okay? So that's why we've tucked them in for tonight, is it will help prevent that freezing from happening. But the right answer is to cut down these pine trees and shove those burrows underneath. One, you'll keep insulated, but two, it'll prevent it from freezing. So in a case of emergency, you can get the fuck out, okay? And it also helps when you're packing everything down. You won't have to rip the tent off the frozen ground and potentially tear the tent up, okay? So it's just a little maintenance thing. That's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do for insulation is those same pine burrows, start lining the floor with that, or the outsides of the tent. That's a good thing too. But you want to make sure enough that you can get out and crawl out in emergency.
So we're going to adapt this for 4 people so that we can have a hole in the middle for a fire. That's what the Von Rec primarily allows us to do. So if you guys wouldn't mind pulling those 2 apart, have 2 of you pull these ones apart, and Parker can reclaim his poles. It's a trapezoid, right? So you have a tip on the end. That's what closes off the end of the normal orientation. We're looking for where the poles go. This nice big, I guess it's riveted ring. Exactly. So then pull tension that way. Perfect. Now we'll put our other 2 poles in. At some point we need to decide where our door is going to be, right? Because that is going to determine whether we stake the flaps down or not. If we want it to be wherever we want it to be, we just understand that to enter and exit the structure, we actually take it apart, or we duck underneath. Either or. So that's management of the equipment inside, wherever you're going to primarily stash different things, so on and so forth. Figure that out within your fire team. And all that. Rucks kind of usually end up in the corners with the people in between them. Then the slightly larger hole. I won't go into super details of firecraft. You guys should be able to handle that, but we've got the air hole to bring that air in, keep the shelter from getting all smoked up. Obviously this is the door. Try not to go out other directions. When you do, eventually somebody's going to try and pee and go out really fast and take the whole shelter. Just remember, this is how it goes back together. It'll remain all staked out, it should, and it should be pretty easy to put back the way it was. Make sense? Mm-hmm. Any questions on how to make a Von Rec in a Dakota fire pit?
Well, that's it, guys. That concludes part 1 of this coverage of the 2021 Winter Forge Training Event hosted by S&S Training Solutions with help from the Light Fighter Studies Group. If you're liking what you're seeing, stay tuned. Part 2 will cover the 24-hour field training exercise that took place the next day. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to leave a comment.